Welcome everyone to our next installment of Rebels with Heart, New Rules of Leadership, and I'm very blessed to have you here. So as I said, thank you to all for joining us for this next series of the Rebels with Heart, New Leadership Rules. And I'm so blessed and honored to have our guest here with us today, three amazing women leaders who are really pioneers in the space of people and culture, and have been and continue to just impress upon me the opportunity that exists now more than ever for leadership in a really interesting time of change in our world and in our businesses and for our collective future. So with that, I will kind of go around robin and allow each of our guests to introduce themselves. So why don't we start at the top with you, Kathi?
Well, the top, okay. Hi, and good morning. It's a pleasure. My name is Kathi Winter, and I have the grand privilege of leading the people and culture organization for a company called MetaBank, which is a virtual bank that plays kind of in the prepaid and the payment space as well as commercial lending. And prior to that time, I've spent a number of years playing always in the people space around change and leadership. And my passion, as we will all talk about, is all around the health and wellness and safety and support and development of people, and specifically in the business world.
Amazing.
I'm delighted to be here, and thank you.
Thank you, Kathi. And then kind of rolling down, we'll go to you, Shannon.
Hi, good morning, everyone. Great to be here. Very excited to be part of the conversation. I'm Shannon Teixeira, Director of People Solutions with Waste Management, which is the largest environmental provider here in North America. And similar to Kathi, have spent the time in my human resources work really looking at ways that we can disrupt the current thinking and paradigm of how we work, why we work, and the role of leaders. And so I'm really excited to have this conversation today with all of you. So thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Shannon. And then we'll come over to you, Anne, as well.
Good morning, and it's great to be here with you all. My name is Ann Rhoades, and I'm the PRES, which stands for Person Responsible for Extraordinary Service of People, Inc. And it is a small consulting firm, and our practice is based around a set of values and behaviors that we define for people as we create very unique cultures for companies. We're 20 years old, and we have a team that has been around for 20 years creating specific cultures based on values in companies. And so we're thrilled to be here today.
Amazing. And just as a point of reference, you also worked, I believe, in the airline industry, which is an industry.
Yes, my history is as a people person. I always called it people because I couldn't spell personnel and I hated in human resources. So we called it people, and literally was in the airline business, JetBlue, Southwest.
Amazing. Thank you for that. And I think just to comment, the fact that each of you brings a background right now from transportation, which is going through major upgrades, so to speak, to how we look at the environment and managing the environment and how we can take care of the planet, to how we transact and economically move forward in a whole different model, virtual banking and different types of currencies. I mean, each of you brings literally a bridge forward to where we can potentially go as new business models and companies and partnerships emerge that are going to be creating the future of business. So I think that's just a little backdrop that I'll set as an intention for our conversation. Again, I'm Derek Lundsten with LifeGuides, and we are building a platform for caring people to do extraordinary good by connecting people through technology for the purpose of human-to-human support going through their life challenges, which I think we can all acknowledge there's a lot of challenges in our world and our life right now. So that's what we're here to do. We're going to help 1 billion people to alleviate their struggling and suffering and to be happier by doing it. So with that, why don't we jump back into the conversation? I kind of set a frame just a moment ago on how these industries and companies are evolving. I'd love to hear from any one of you just in terms of how the last few months we've had a pandemic, global health crisis, followed by an economic disruption in terms of we have significant unemployment. Companies and industries are changing overnight. And now we're moving into a place of discussion around equality, diversity, inclusion, leadership, trust. I mean, this is a perfect storm of factors that will change the future of what is possible. So with that, I would like each of you to chime in on your thoughts on some of those points.
I would just make the comment that I think this is the time for great leaders to step up. The only thing that's guaranteed now is turbulence probably going forward. And we think that it's really important to have various competencies during certain times. And I really believe that the new leaders have to be very willing to take on and encourage change. You know, we've talked about it forever, but the new leaders need to not only embrace change, but they need to be willing to be very transparent. They need to over communicate, and they need to take this as an opportunity to learn and to improve their cultures. I was saying early on that they just did some surveys at HR Executive, and they found that 75% of the people they surveyed at all levels, various companies, were really excited about this improving their culture. And we can make this a real opportunity for us. The right kind of leaders can really take this on it and not call it a crisis, but call it an opportunity.
I love that you just reframed that. I completely agree with you, Ann. I'll pass it over to each of the other two ladies to share their thoughts.
Yeah, and I would segue off of that with this notion, and we've talked about this a little bit, that what we might have in the world today is this crisis of trust, right? Mm-hmm. And so, this unsettled feeling and this uncertainty that came as a result of a pandemic and then has been furthered through some of the social injustices that are rising to the surface, have always been there, but rising to the surface. That this notion that we may be able to work with our organizations differently today, right, to make them feel safe, right? That trust comes from safety, that psychological and physical safety, as well as this notion that we can both optimize and help our teams to flourish, right? All as a result of a feeling, I think, that crosses the globe of not trusting, right? And that lack of trust came as a result of some things that were outside of our control. Yeah. But what Ann says, some of the things that we can do internally today will help rebuild that and rebuild us for the future, right? And so if we can all, as kind of leaders in this space, be thinking about where that root cause is, right? And work toward that, work from the place of that root cause as leaders, we will thrive. So.
Kathi.
And I'll kind of jump in and maybe thread a needle between what both Ann and Kathi mentioned and kind of where I've been thinking, and it's really around intention and the role that everyone within an organization or socially plays. And it starts, I think, with our own personal intentions and our mindsets and the work that we all have in that place. And then further is really looking at the organizational systems, systemically, how are we set up? What, guides and policies and behaviors, truly do we have, and where are we? And I think right now is just a great opportunity for, I read an article in Medium and I loved it. It was called We're in the Great Pause, because we have been able to pause. And I think in that pause is the opportunity to reflect and look really deeply at ourselves and how we're showing up, but also deeply inside of our organizations to unwind and really frame out what that current state is, so that future state, to Kathy's point around trust and, around the, new emerging leader that we do need as we move into, an even broader, knowledge economy that will enable to flourish. And it really has to be systemically created or designed. And right now, I think is this perfect opportunity for organizations to really unwind, take a look at what they have in play today, where they want to go, and really rethink and reformulate what their path ahead is going to be.
Yeah. So a couple of things on that. So first off, thank you as well. The intention that you just set on that comments, I think it come very well into what I want to go back to in a moment here. So back to the intention of bridging the trust gap and root cause of that. Where do you all see that fundamental breakdown right now that's happened over time, and what is the immediate step? Take organizations out for just a second, but just as a humanity, as individual people, as you're describing, with this level of introspection that we're now being asked of ourselves, right? What is that? How does that translate into the conversation that you're having within your companies, both personally and organizationally? So it's a multi-part question. I always keep it simple.
You've got to take notes now, Derek.
Yeah.
I think trust is earned, and it's earned every day. And it's been more difficult because typically trust is earned as you see leaders behave every day when you're with them, right? So now we are each of us in our own homes, and we're distancing rather than being in one place. And I think how leaders are going to treat what is happening is really going to build or perhaps not build trust. So an example, Southwest Airlines for 46 years has not had a furlough. And the news is that the airlines will not be returning to normal levels for up to 5 years.
Yeah.
Which means that keeping all those people employed and not furloughing and not letting them go, which they have traditionally never done. I mean, they haven't done it in 46 years. They're one of the few. This is a time when that is going to come into play because they have high trust there. Mm-hmm. So what happens now when you have this kind of issue that is going to really cause them to potentially lose trust, because they're going to have to make some very tough decisions. So watching leaders during this time either build or perhaps not build or destroy trust, even if they already have trust, they're going to be watching their behaviors. And they're going to be watching to see how they behave in a time of crisis, along with, you know, it's easy to behave when everything's going well, right, or to behave well, though some still don't behave well, I might add, even when it's going well. But building trust is something you do every day as a leader. And so I think it's going to be interesting to watch what leaders do during this period of time when it is very difficult. And do they go back to those values and those behaviors that are part of their DNA, hopefully, the ones that are good values and behaviors.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. I have a specific question on that, but I want to allow both the other panelists to chime in on any thoughts they might have there.
I would just say, you know, the challenge is exactly what Anne identified, right? You have a company, you know, a legendary company like Southwest, right, that has done an incredible job over multiple decades around not only demonstrating to the world what its value proposition is, but guiding its entire internal operating system based on that, right? And the furloughing is a perfect example. So the question they have to ask themselves is not only what are we going to be in the future from a business perspective, but how do we carry through the very fiber of what made us successful in the past, right? And so, and trust for them, right? I mean, that's a perfect example because Southwest is a company legendary for having built trust, right? And they've built it not only across their internal, you know, employee base, but also look at everybody externally. Their customers trust them implicitly, right? And so how do you continue that? If, I'll dare say, I don't know that their value proposition is going to change. I don't know that the furlough plan is going to change, but in the face of something that looks really different economically.
Right.
Right. So.
Well, so I think that's an interesting path we could explore, right? Around trust and around leaders as well, right? And around a really taboo topic, right? Which is around, you know, when you look at the furloughs and you look at economic survivability of a company versus providing for people and providing a future and providing what's aligned with their values and their needs of their families, i.e. access to education, healthcare, food, survival, and the different things we talked about to create safety as a foundational layer to then self-development, self-actualization, and contribution to society. What role as leaders and organizations do we have in that right now, especially because we're being challenged? I mean, many companies across many industries are being challenged for their survival, right? And that affects people at the core in a local level. And so how do we bridge that gap? And what do leaders do? And how do we work as communities and groups of people to really optimize for what I'll call it, you know, multi-stakeholder capitalism or all stakeholder capitalism. And the recognition that part of the, and this is just my opinion, that part of the, protests and civil discourse that we've been seeing in the world is driven in many ways by the fact that we've compounded a pandemic with economic, depression, magnified with a moment that you have some people who are on one side of the equation, others on the other side. It's like, how do we bring that back together and unify for what we really stand for people first and taking care of our planet as good stewards and providing for future generations in the regenerative culture. So I'm kind of on a soapbox, but I felt like let's call the elephant out of the room here, right? Yeah. So that's not political. That's just a blanket observation, right? So.
Well, and I think your point, I'll just jump in, Derek. I think your point, is kind of well formed in that, we have gone through an enormous amount of transformation, both as just a human kind, right, as well as organization within the past 70 years. I mean, if you look back, it is that, you know, there was a World Economic Forum quote that I just love because it really connected with me. And it was that it stated, "We've never moved this fast in the history of our time, and never again will we move this slow." It really resonated with me because it couldn't be more true, right? And I think what you're, you know, diving into is this idea of the circular economy. And we do have to really connect through and you know, we use the word again, thread, but really thread, you know, how we as individuals contribute to the circular economy. You know, what is our role as individuals, as people who are in organizations, out of organizations, community members, right? Because we are all connected. And I think this point in time has really brought to life in an example, in a beautiful example, that we are all connected, that we are now all part of this circular economy. And I think our roles and our responsibilities, the responsibility of organizations, which I know you and I've had that conversation, you know, I do think it's evolving and it's shifting and changing, you know, and in my opinion, for the better, because we do have a responsibility as a humankind to help to lift each other up, to help one another become a better version of each other, you know, as we go forward. And by in turn doing that, you know, right, the value proposition of that is that we are, you know, engaging and creating a place that's better than the one in which we're in today. And I just think it's incredibly important. And I do think that organizations have a vital role, as do the leaders inside of those organizations, to really impact the people in which they're touching, both internal, but also within the communities that we're all living and working in.
And you know, it's time we become great storytellers about positive stories, just what you're talking about. Great stories about organizations responding in a way that today really makes a difference. We've heard some stories during COVID and some stories during all the turmoil that we're going through, but we need to become better storytellers as leaders. Stories about behaviors that represent the values, as you say, to the community, things that we can do for the community, but also start inside. We need to become caring leaders for our teams, and it needs to be just automatic. It isn't something you think about, it's just something you do. So I think both in case of Southwest and in JetBlue, the two that I at least know the most, and Regis, I serve on the Regis Hair Salon board, we paid for our stylists to be covered by their medical care, even though they were furloughed when they closed all the salons. That's a caring example. We need to see more stories. I believe both Southwest, and check me on this, and JetBlue paid basic salary to everyone during the furloughs. There are things we can show that organizations are doing that become examples to other leaders. But they need to we need to start talking about positive stories. I'm frankly not happy hearing all the negative stories. I think we need to get back to a position as we come out of this where we start generating all those great stories so people get back to this positive thinking, and so it becomes secondary. What you're talking about should be it should be automatic for all of us. We should care about our communities. We need to care about our teams first, though, and I say that because that's how we get back to caring about the community and everyone else. I'm a Pollyanna, by the way, so.
And that actually comes as a, you know, we all know this implicitly, you know, that kind of influence comes as a direct result of the relationships. Right. And so we as leaders absolutely own, right, taking that first step and making sure that the relationships inside the organization are really solid. Where does that come from? That comes from the right kind of communication at the right time, right, with the right messaging back and forth.
Critical.
And so, you know, we talk about these things, but at the end of the day, it's funny, you know, our human condition is, I don't want to say very basic, but at the end of the day, it is really basic, right? And we can make it easy for easier for leaders to lead through this time, right? If we remind them of the basics. And the basics are solid relationships, right? Built on transparent communication, which will build loyalty and trust. You have that, right? Then you have the unique position, I'll keep using Southwest, that Southwest Airlines is sitting in right now.
Yeah.
Right? They have a cadre of human beings that will follow them to the ends of the earth.
You're right.
Right? And that cadre is looking and believing that their leaders will get them there. Whatever that end of the earth is, yeah. Right? And so I tell you that because I think Anne's spot on too. And what's the best way to do that? And who's one of the best storytellers? Southwest Airlines. They've told the same story for 50 years, and we all know it.
Yeah.
Right. And so she's right. And why can they do that? Why are they effective in doing that? Those stories are really natural for them. Right? Because they have the right kind of relationships that are fed by continuous communication about their values and beliefs.
Yeah.
Drives trust and loyalty.
So
I'm making it sound simpler. I know it's not that simple.
It kind of goes, I'll take a comment that kind of follows on the question. I mean, you're describing as nurturing, right? And the concept of, I'll take it even a step below trust, or even more foundational to trust. Like, what's the role of love by leaders in business, right? If you take it a different lens, and I look at kind of integrating what I'll call, masculine and feminine leadership styles and intelligences, as we've evolved over the last 30 years and over the last 10 years, and as we're about to evolve even more over the next 5 years, how can we optimize for that level of, optimization that we're talking about, where we actually are using business as a platform for creating an environment of love, which leads to we have to be able to define that. How do we really define love? How do we really define trust? How do we then communicate that? But is there opportunity now to really use this as a true change agent for how we, guide our organizations and the interconnection of different types of organizations moving forward? So it's a long question, but that's something that we feel strongly about with LifeGuides. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Well, I would just say something. I think something you started to say a little bit was sometimes female leaders can make a real difference at this period of time. I know as a female leader who is one of the top women in the Fortune magazine is one of the top leaders, and I'm not going to use her name because I haven't gotten permission, but she did a survey in her large company. It has 6 locations around the United States. One of the locations is in Denver. And what she did was she did a survey because she said, I'm a mother. I care about, now that you all are home, let's find out, do you want to stay at home? Do you want to come into work 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, 4 days, 5 days? She did a survey, and she said the results of that survey would actually determine their new operating procedures. And she found out that a variety of young people who are single actually want to come into work more because that's their engagement they get with people. They love that relationship. But the moms might want to come in later. They might want to work 10-hour days, 4 instead of 5. And what she's going to do as a female leader, she understands it. And she's going to actually change who they are and what they are as a result of the survey. She's asking everyone in the company. I had another COO that's a female leader do the same thing with their company that's a telemed company. I just noticed they're starting to, the caring is a huge value to me in terms of a leader. And I think this has brought out some of those caring traits in leaders that also end up being the brand trait. To be very honest, it also helps define the brand if you have caring leaders. So this is, again, it's just a great time to watch some of the female, I don't know, and it's not because I'm prejudiced. I love male and female leaders, but I just have recently had 2 calls from female leaders talking about how they're going to embrace the change and make sure that they do what's right by treating people individually, because someone may want to work 4 10s and someone may want to stay home, and they're going to accommodate them. It's very interesting.
I think Anne makes a really interesting point, and from my own observation, in that, maybe in my own personal time that I've been on Earth, is that there's been no other time that I've personally experienced something that is impacting everyone else. Everyone else is being impacted very different ways, right? Yeah. And so I think it's brought up maybe a layer of empathy that, you know, through course, some of us have, you know, maybe more broadly than others, but at the end of the day, we've all been impacted. And so therefore that idea of empathizing becomes a little bit more resonant. And I, you know, and early on, I was so inspired of seeing, you know, not only our company, but a number of companies, to Anne's point, you know, connecting with their people, really listening to what they were saying that they needed and responding to their needs rather than, you know, kind of taking the other direction of, you know, hey, this is what I think I'm hearing, right? Because I'm not listening and I'm going to come up with something and then we're going to push it out. In fact, I'm seeing it in the reverse, which, you know, which I think for, you know, those of us that are in the people realm, you know, change management, we certainly know that that is so important for sustainability. But to see a majority of organizations, at least that I've been looking at, you know, really make those decisions based on the voice of their employees, what they're hearing from their people, and connecting, you know, back to their values. There is no better time now to really be who you say you are, which then becomes your brand, right? Your culture is your brand. And you know, and I just continue to see this surgence of empathy, which, you know, we, you know, in conversations I have, you know, we talk about leading with love, and it's a great thing, right? That we show up, you know, in that way. And I think to Anne's earlier point around storytelling, I think it's incumbent upon all of us to continue to be a voice in sharing those stories, because there is a lot of really great things happening within organizations and within society today. We just have to keep communicating and continue showing up, and sharing, you know, sharing those stories, sharing those impacts, because we truly will, through this time, I know we are going to evolve business in a way that we've never evolved before.
Yeah. Completely agree. Anything else you want to add, Anne or Kathi, on that point?
Nope, I mean, I think they both covered it. The one thing I would say, and feels a little bit uncomfortable, but this has been a great equalizer in some respects, right? Because you know, we have people sitting in their homes, right? And so you're not walking, I'll just use this silly example, you're not walking down to the CEO's grand office, coming from your workstation, but now you're on a Zoom call together, right? And so everybody's wearing their t-shirt and their sweats and sitting in front of their family photos or whatever it is, right? And so there's something really refreshing about that when we think about employees being engaged and the trust level that employees, they have getting through some of the things that we have ahead, right? Because some of the crisis, the results of the crisis have put us in a place, if you will, where we have to use common tools all the time, right? And those common tools are driving a certain type and format for communication, right? Which is actually opening some interesting doors for us around building relationships that will serve us in the future. So it sounds goofy, but you know, sort of out of the ashes of some of these things, if we're smart, right? If we're watching for it, we're using some of those things as part of how we build for the future. Yeah,
completely agree with that. So along that same line, and along something you've all touched on, how do we change our relationship with time as well in relation to this now? I mean, I think that we built our businesses generally off of a 40-hour work week. We're now in a world where we have 168 hours in a work week, however people want to choose it, right? So the idea is that we can apply however we want to, or that we can optimize our team and compensate our teams accordingly to their schedules, their output, their contribution, their whatever. There's all sorts of new creative models we can create off of looking at a totally different way we optimize our time because of this exact situation around time efficiencies through travel and communication and so forth. So how does that potentially change in the future, and how does that inform communication, trust, and leadership?
I think we're lucky we have the internet today. You can communicate at 3 in the morning and maybe they get it at 8 in the morning, but we can communicate using the internet. We can communicate I've spent 6 hours on average a day on Zoom lately. I'm zoomed out almost. No, I love it. Just wish I bought their stock. But truly, I think one of the problems is that we need to start thinking, now my team will crack up at this because I don't think people work equally in terms of, I had a COO call me and say, I can't get the work done during the day. I have 3 little ones, and we both have our home offices. Both of us are working from home, but my day really starts at 2 when I finish their plans for their e-learning at home, because he has to be on the phone all around the world during the day, and he starts then and takes over at 2. And you know, we shouldn't care. Everyone's not equal. There are people who working from home may have to work at night, and I think it is incumbent upon us to trust people. You get back to trust, to do their job, to deliver whatever it is they're working on, their projects, or have the deliverables, and then trust them to get it done. There's no longer you have to be on the phone from 8 to 5 with your boss, or you have to be available in an office. Let's just start trusting people to get the job done. And if that doesn't happen, then we have another conversation. But I think it gets back to trust and understanding everyone is not the same. People are not created equal when it comes to, we're all equal, but it's not equal when it comes to maybe schedules. We may not be on the same schedules. We need to be flexible and say, that's okay. This thing about, you know, we all have to be there 8 to 5 is absolutely crazy. It's gone. So don't even think about it. And we have one CEO that didn't believe it, so he wouldn't let everyone do that. And when they were home, they still had to report in 8 to 5. Guess what? He's changed already. That was only 3 months ago. He kept saying, no, I want him on the phone 8 to 5 or be able to access. Now he says, just get the job done. And that's the answer. But we need to understand that.
Yeah, and that's actually what makes this situation unique, right? Because that change happened, right? And now we have insight. You know, usually we have insight and then we try and drive change, right? Which sometimes has, you know, mediocre results. Now we have rapid and radical change.
Rebellious change.
That is providing us with insight, right? And so the most successful organizations, whether they're, you know, companies or communities or churches or what nonprofits, are the ones that have said, let me reflect on that change, right, that we just lived through, and let me take the very best elements of that change, right, and continue to build our new operating rhythms, our new environment based on that. And, you know, it's a really pivotal time. If you know, I'm going to be a little bit maybe uncomfortable for folks, but, you know, organizations that have unions, you know, organizations that run, you know, like our government, this should be a challenging time for them. Because the very frameworks by which they define success have been shattered.
Correct.
Right. And so we actually have data, right? Because we all had to play differently, like it or not, that tells us something. And if we're smart, right, and I know we all are, we'll take that and we'll say to ourselves, we're not going to apply the old thinking or the old rules, but instead we're going to take that new, you know, information that demonstrates productivity and, you know, ability to run the company and ability to thrive and flourish, and we'll ask ourselves questions using that lens. Right. And that's a challenge for some of us. That is some of the challenge that we need to consider inside our organizations, is pushing those questions.
So let me ask you, along those lines, thank you, Kathi. I completely think that's a really strong point. And I also think it ties into a nice question we got actually from one of the audience that I think would be perfect for you, Shannon, to answer first, because I think it kind of applies to your skill set nicely. So a question that was here about a key part of change management is giving people access to knowledge so they can gain some comfort in knowing and ask questions. How do we support our teams when there's so many unknowns and there's not a how-to guide for these changes? As someone who I know is very appreciative of process and building that out, when you think of these different points of view, what are your thoughts on that, Shannon?
Sure, and certainly, right, I think going back to everything that we've been talking about, it's that nexus of connection, and connection of being heard, and a connection of listening. And so, you know, from my lens and some of the things that we're doing within, you know, waste management, is really listening to say, you know, where do you want that information to come from? And I think it goes back to even, you know, looking at marketing from a practice standpoint to say, you know, the marketing methodology is that, you know, marketing now has to go to where the customers are. The customers aren't coming to you. And I think that's the same thing for an organization within change management, is that, you know, you've got to be agile enough to have multiple, I call them modalities of connection, because every individual, and it becomes much more customized, which is, you know, a different segue for, you know, conversation, because I do think that organizations are going to become a bit more customized. That employee experience is going to look and feel different. I think there's so much room for evolution there. But going back to the question, I do think, you know, you've got to create lots of different modalities. You've got to create different connection points that someone is comfortable with, because that is the place in which they're going to be comfortable going to. They're going to, you know, inherently trust that source, and the information they're getting from that source, you know, has to be right. And it has to be, I think Kathi said it, you know, the right information at the right time. And I just think that it has to be, again, I use the word intentional, but very intentionally built through the organization. So as an example, you know, there's so much technology, which is the slippery slope of not having too much, but also figuring out where that middle ground is. But I think that is through pulsing. It is through connecting and listening to your people to say, you know, what platform is working, what modality is working. At Waste Management, you know, I will tell you that we've gone from a brick and mortar to, you know, for all of our, you know, back office support, you know, over 10,000 people remote work within a 2-week period of time, standing up, you know, an app, a WM Now app, standing up different courses of connection that, you know, our CEO Jim Fish is using to connect, and how all of that is threading in to make sure people feel informed, are informed, and have the information to take whatever action that they feel that they need to take, and then have that feedback loop. And again, you know, it has to be architected to some degree, but architected in real time through the feedback loops that you're getting through, you know, through and from your people.
Yeah.
Totally agree. We were the first ones to do at-home res agents at JetBlue when we started JetBlue. We have 4,000 of them that have been at home for 20 years. And we always win the JD Power #1 for customer service. But I got to tell you, there were a lot of learnings along the way. There are things that work and don't work. But the one thing that worked that you're talking about is you have to over communicate. They still have to build trust and to build loyalty, you still have to be part of the organization. So we over communicate. So every morning when they turn on their computer, they see the values across the screen, first thing. And then they also have all the information on what's been going on for the day. They know what the numbers are. They know what the metrics are. They know where we stand on those metrics. And so over communicating when people are at home and it's virtual is really important. So they feel like, so you build that loyalty, you build that trust, because otherwise they're sitting out there alone and they don't know what's going on. So I think having a process, as she's talking about over communicating and making sure they're part of the organization. They can't just sit out there and take reservations all day.
Yeah.
They have to know what's going on in the brand. So over communicating is a critical component of being successful when you start virtual workforces.
Yeah. So along the same lines, a couple of points that you both mentioned, how do organizations' responsibilities change now that, if we think about working from home and the school systems, university systems are being impacted because of these changes, and even children, you know, and the policies around that are being changed? What potential role do we have as leaders in the convergence between education, technology, skills development, both practical and emotional adaptive skills for our, you know, our children or our employees, and actually creating a model for employability that we can all kind of source from, that we're all kind of investing in that framework? Like, how, I think that's a massive opportunity. What do you think is possible or we should be doing from an organizational and a communication standpoint between even competitors, for example, in industries? I think this changes that entire piece. If you go back to looking at people first, not just about, I mean, there's an element, obviously, of competition that's important. I'm not saying we need to move away from that, but I think, how do we integrate that? How do we look at a different model that elevates, you know, a bigger group of people and ultimately creates bigger levels of contribution in our society?
I'll jump in, Derek. You know, I would say I feel very passionate about kind of about your question, and that, you know, the work around networks and the networks of teams, and really what the future will hold, and how we work together, and how our relationships are going to be forged by the way in which we work. And what does that look like, both from an organizational standpoint, but to your point, in our ability to impact and influence from a community standpoint, from a school system to, you know, to other organizational systems in which we connect. And I think we're really at the front end of what's possible within that realm. And as I think about, you know, our intended desires to, you know, to feel more connected, to, you know, work within this idea that I know someone has my back, regardless of where you're at, whether you're at work or somewhere else, right? So we can start that, and I think we've done a great job, you know, from an organization standpoint, to start to have those conversations and maybe micro labs. You know, I think of, you know, not only Waste Management, Southwest Airlines, Adobe, you know, I know Walmart. There are so many organizations that are running, you know, I'll call them the incubators, right? Incubators to really think about what's possible, go through the experimentation to think, how can we start shifting the way that we connect? That then I do believe will have a residual effect on then the school systems and that infrastructure in the traditional realm, because at the end of the day, the school system is the feeder to the skills in which organizations need, right, as we move forward. And one of the really cool things that I participated in last year was through the Phoenix School Union, and that particular team was really rethinking the school infrastructure. So they've actually come up with what they call academies, working with the Ford group, which is has a philanthropic arm, to really again think about what does school look like starting at the very earliest stages. It was so inspirational to me, because again, you think about the connection a student has with the teacher and the way in which they're learning. All those things create different beliefs. Your experiences drive your beliefs drive your behaviors, you know, impact your outcomes. And it has to start there. And those experiences that at the very earliest ages children are having, that will help to morph the evolution that truly we do need to be a much more connected society. And then organizations, though, have to be ready within their infrastructures to be able to handle that. And so you know, when you think about end to end, you know, it's both sides of the you know, pendulum that have to be working in unison and have to come together. And certainly I think that there's probably more work between organizations and school systems that, you know, fostering that connection point that is very inorganic, so that we can start to inform whatever the future of our connections and organizational systems will look like.
Definitely want to continue this conversation with you offline. That's for sure. Any other thoughts from other you ladies on this thought moment?
Well, I totally agree. We need to work together. And I know that in the case of JetBlue, we've adopted schools, and we go in and high schools and anywhere from kindergarten, you know, K to 8. And we've adopted the schools to go in and talk to them and work with them, and they can learn from business and we can learn from them. Are they educating them so they can come into the workforce, and how do we do it, and how do we do it in a very different way? So we've been having all kinds of conversations, or they have at JetBlue, with the schools that are around the area, the communities we serve. And it's been really helpful to us, we've learned, and they, I think, have learned from us. So I think working together with all the, and by the way, it's not just them, it's all kinds of community organizations we reach out to. I think working together, as someone said early on, it's about us getting involved in the communities and working together to make it better for education and make it better for the businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. Mm-hmm. How do you see, along these same lines, how do you see the world evolving as it pertains to real estate and real estate's impact on the environment, especially within each of your industries? There's a lot of relevancy to what each of you do on how that is affected. So.
Well, I got a call yesterday from someone who said they just canceled their new building because they talked to their people and the people said they would like to be in the office 1 or 2 days, but they don't want to come full-time back to the office.
No.
And so they're going to take cubicles that will have dividers and 2 people will share a cubicle. Instead of having one for every single person, they are in an open environment. They're actually going to have shared space and they will schedule it themselves. The organization's not going to schedule it. The 2 employees that are assigned that area are going to schedule it. And she said it just saved them in bricks and mortars millions of dollars. But what she likes about it is, A, they're communicating, the 2 people schedule. Every week they have to schedule the time and it can vary. But also they listen to them and design their new building around what people want today instead of what used to be the organization wanted. It's now what the people of the organization want. And she was so excited to be able to, the builder wasn't so happy. Commercial real estate may not be excited, the real estate guys, but I will tell you the organizations are listening to people and it is going to be a different environment. And as we said early on, and it's going to come quick. It's not going to take a long time for this change.
Yeah.
In my opinion, I'm not an expert, but I'm just.
Yeah. I agree. Well, so kind of going back to the beginning on the intention, I mean, this pandemic, I think for everyone has brought a level of introspection around, you know, what's important to us in terms of our relationships, around communication, around time, around, you know, corporate cultures. I mean, what personally have you, and each of you or your company has kind of taken away from this in terms of, you know, just massive changes that you're now going to be applying to your life, for example, as a result of the time that, you know, this is kind of the great pause, if you will, right?
Well, I'll say for waste management, you know, it's been an opportunity to, as I stated earlier, to look at how we work and use this time to innovate forward and really look at what those opportunities are to accelerate things that maybe we had had some conversations on, you know, and I always think back to that example of, you know, moving, you know, almost 10,000 people from, you know, brick and mortar to virtual environment, you know, within the course of a couple of weeks. And, you know, and I think that example is so important because it just, it shows, you know, what is possible when, you know, when we can work together, we've got a common goal and, you know, we're dedicated to execute for, you know, for the greater good. And I just think that, you know, specifically for us, that those are all of the things that are the outcomes. You know, what can we do when we say, you know, our commitment is to be people first? You know, what does that look like in action? And now is the time for you know, not only our organization, but I think for every organization to really stand behind those commitments and values that they have and be able to put into action the opportunities that, you know, exist through this whole course of disruption, you know, this crazy time that we're in. Again, I just think that there's so much opportunity for innovation. You know, innovation, you know, happens within chaos a lot of times. You think back, and even in 2008, there was so much innovation that came out of that. And I just feel like if we don't look and root into what is possible, you know, boy, we've missed an opportunity. And I certainly know from our perspective, you know, we're using every opportunity to evolve fast and make as many, you know, positive adjustments as possible as we go forward.
Yeah. I think it's almost impossible not to now. I mean, we've been so, I mean, it's literally the, you know, the brick wall in our face, not like, you know, the feather. We just, everyone as a collective society, we got run over, right? It's like, if you're not going to change now, when are you going to get the message?
Yeah, the gift of the brick wall for all of us. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I think too is a small segue on that, but everybody's alluded to it, is, you know, I'll use Shannon's example of if we think we are people first, if that is one of the core values of an organization, right? There used to be, or there has been, a definition of success of that in the past, right? Companies have defined, you know, if we're going to call ourselves people first, what is the definition of success, right? How are we demonstrating that? right? And so if we really think about it, the core value isn't going to change of waste management, right? Their core values are going to stay the same. But the way we measure success for that is going to change, right? And so that's kind of the challenge for all of us is what is that new measurement of success, right? And then how do we start living it? And, you know, and then how do we engage our organization? You know, I'll just use an example, like how do you use your best and brightest talent or the leaders of waste management of the future to build that? Right? How are we getting them engaged in answering that question and defining that success criteria?
Yeah.
Right? And so I just think to myself, yeah, you know, lots of these things won't change. It's just the guts inside of it and the measure inside of that, the value measure should shift, right?
What's important is that you don't just let it happen. We do it by design. So we have the values, whether we've defined them or not in an organization, but by design, this is an opportunity to make sure those values, to reiterate and rethink those values and those behaviors, because they might slightly change given the new environment, though in most cases we will still have the same values. But I think not letting this opportunity pass. Take this time and say, are these the values going forward? Are these the right behaviors? Is the purpose we have changed or is the purpose the same? And continue to get input on that from your A-player team members, because I think this is, I mean, people should be celebrating this. This is an opportunity to continue to be values-based and have the right behaviors, but at least think about it. Do not just let it happen. Design it to your values and your behaviors. So going forward, the definition of the brand is literally about the values and the behaviors.
Well, so along those lines then, I mean, I think we've kind of touched on it in this conversation already, but I mean, is there an opportunity to have another system of measurement of value beyond just call it money? Like, can we measure time? Can we measure productivity? Can we measure trust? Can we measure purpose? Can we measure joy? Right? Can we measure all those different factors as an organization, the impact as it ripples out to the different stakeholders that we're talking about? Like, is this a moment that we can use to start to look at how do we measure our collective happiness as a society differently, right? I mean, that's what we're doing. That's what LifeGuides is doing, right? That's our purpose. But is there a way to align the entire business ecosystem around? I mean, why do we buy products? We buy them for our survival because they're going to make our life better, right? So how do we make everyone's lives better? That's what I think we should be asking. Well, thank you everyone for your time with the Leaders with a Heart, the new rules of leadership. This has been a great conversation. Can't wait to see you all next one. And thank you to each of you ladies. We'll look forward to seeing you and your families soon.